The wind carried dust down the empty main street of Dry Creek, curling it into small whirlwinds that tugged at the hems of worn skirts and rattled loose shutters on abandoned storefronts. The town had been shrinking for years, its gold rush days long gone, its trade dwindling with the railroad's new line that had bypassed it. For those who remained, survival meant tightening belts or hard bargaining with whatever power one could muster. And for two young sisters, Clara and June Whitfield, survival was no longer a question of thrift, it was a matter of desperation. Clara walked with her chin high, though the soles of her boots were worn thin and her coat patched twice over. Her hand tightened on June's wrist, guiding her younger sister through the muddy street. June's shoulders trembled beneath her faded shawl, her eyes darting nervously at the men leaning against porch rails, watching them as if they were game-cornered in the wild. They had been in town for 3 weeks now, sleeping in a drafty corner of the livery when the owner, a kind old stableman, took pity on them. Their farm, the only inheritance left from their father, had been seized when debts came due. Debts Clara had tried to bargain down, debts their mother's illness had made impossible to pay. With both parents gone and no family willing to take them in, they had nowhere else to turn but this town, a place where pity was in short supply and opportunity even shorter. "Keep your head down, June," Clara whispered as they passed a group of men lounging outside the saloon. "Don't meet their eyes." June nodded, clutching the bundle of meager belongings pressed to her chest. She was softer than Clara, her spirit gentler, her features delicate as porcelain, though now smudged with dust and shadowed by hunger. Clara feared for her the most. June's quiet beauty caught stares Clara wished she could deflect, and already whispers had begun. Rumors of men who would offer food and coin for favors. Clara had stood her ground against them, but she knew her defiance was a brittle wall against a rising tide. This afternoon was no different. One of the men, a broad-shouldered fellow with a greasy mustache and too smooth drawl, pushed himself off the saloon post and blocked their path. "Now ain't this a sight?" he said, eyes sliding over June in a way that made her shrink against Clara's side. "2 stray kittens, hungry and lost. Don't you think it's time you stopped scrounging and let someone take care of your proper?" Clara's jaw tightened. "Step aside, Mr. Dobbs," he grinned. "Oh, I don't mean no harm. Just saying, a girl like her," his hand twitched toward June, "could live real comfortable if she'd come along with me." Clara shoved his arm aside. "You touch her, and I'll see you regret it." The other men laughed at the fire in her voice, the sound ringing with mockery rather than respect. Dobbs leaned close, his breath sour. "You got fight, I'll give you that. But fight, don't fill your belly. Don't mend boots. Don't keep a roof overhead. Best you think hard, missy, 'cause this town don't run on pride." Clara yanked June past him, her cheeks burning. She hated how powerless she felt, hated the laughter that followed them, hated most of all the fear that gnawed in her belly because she knew Dobbs was right in one regard. Pride didn't keep them alive. They reached the mercantile, but the shelves offered little hope. Their coins bought only a small sack of flour and a few dried beans. Clara held the bag close as they stepped back outside, the sky already paling toward dusk. They would return to the livery, cook a thin gruel, and endure another night of uncertainty. But fate rarely aligned with Clara's plans. Another group of men was waiting near the edge of town, their eyes sharper, their whispers deliberate. She recognized them, ranch hands from outfits nearby, men who'd already made bold suggestions during the last week. As she pulled June closer, one of them stepped forward. "Clara Whitfield," he said, tipping his hat mockingly. "Heard you girls are looking for a way to get by. Now I've got an offer. You come with me. I'll make sure you're fed, clothed, looked after." His gaze slid to June. "Well, maybe it's your sister I'm more interested in. Pretty thing like that shouldn't be wasting away in a stable." Clara's heart hammered. She could feel June trembling, trying to hide behind her shoulder. The men circled just enough to box them in. Clara's throat dried, but she forced her voice steady. "You leave her be. If it's a bargain you want, then—" She swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. "Take me instead, not her. Take me." Her words hung in the air, heavier than the evening chill. There was a hush, broken only by the shuffling of boots and a chuckle from one of the hands. June gasped softly, clutching Clara's sleeve. "No," she whispered, tears already filling her eyes. "Don't say that." Clara ignored her. She met the men's gazes squarely, her chin lifted, though her insides quaked. She had promised her parents she would protect June, and if that meant sacrificing herself, she would. But before Dobbs or the ranch hands could reply, a new presence stirred at the far end of the street. An older man had been leaning against the rail outside the general store, half hidden in the deepening shadows. His hat brim cast his face in shade, but the set of his shoulders and the slow, deliberate way he moved drew the eye. He stepped forward now, boots heavy on the wooden boards, the sound cutting through the tense silence. Samuel Hartley was a man known to most in Dry Creek, though few knew him well. A rancher with more land than most, widowed long ago, he kept to himself. His word was rare, his temper even rarer, but when his gray eyes fixed on a thing, folks tended to step aside. He was no lawman, but the weight of his silence carried its own authority. Now those gray eyes settled on Clara and June. He didn't speak, didn't tip his hat, didn't even glance at the men crowding them. He just stood there, tall and weathered, the lines of age and hard work etched deep into his skin. Clara's breath caught. For a moment she dared to hope that he might intervene, might scatter the circling wolves with a word. She raised her voice, desperate. "Mr. Hartley, please, can you take her instead of me?" She pushed June forward slightly, tears brimming in her own eyes now. "She deserves a chance. She deserves better than this. Take her, not me." June sobbed. "Clara, no." The men exchanged looks, uncertain now with Samuel's silent figure looming nearby. But the old rancher did not answer. He simply regarded the sisters, expression unreadable, as if weighing something far beyond their understanding. The silence stretched unbearably. Clara's heart pounded in her ears. The men began to smirk again, emboldened by his lack of words. But then, Samuel moved. Slow and deliberate, he stepped past the men, his heavy boots grinding dust. Without a word, he took the flour sack from Clara's trembling hands and set it in his own wagon nearby. Then he lifted June's bundle of belongings and placed it beside it. Clara and June froze, stunned. He turned back, his eyes meeting Clara's at last. No words, just a firm tilt of his head toward the wagon. Clara hesitated only a moment before gripping June's hand and pulling her along. The men muttered, but none dared to stop Samuel Hartley as he helped the sisters into the wagon. He climbed onto the bench, reins in his calloused hands, and with a sharp flick, the horse started forward. The town slipped behind them as dusk bled into night. Clara sat rigid, June's sobs quiet against her shoulder. Samuel drove in silence, his face set, his eyes on the dark road ahead. Fear churned in the sisters' stomachs, but beneath it stirred something else, an ember of hope, fragile but real. For whatever his reasons, the old rancher had taken them both. And for the first time in weeks, they were riding away from danger, not toward it. The wagon wheels rattled over the hard-packed trail as night pressed down on the prairie. Clara clutched June close, her arm wrapped around her younger sister's shoulders, while Samuel Hartley held the reins without a word. The creak of wood, the clop of the horses' hooves, and the far-off chorus of coyotes were the only sounds that kept them company. Clara's mind whirled with questions she dared not ask. Why had he taken them both? What would become of them once they reached his ranch? She studied his weathered profile, the faint gleam of lamplight catching the lines carved deep into his face. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but she could feel the weight of his silence, an immovable wall she could not read nor climb. June stirred beside her. "Clara," she whispered, voice raw from crying. "What if he changes his mind? What if he sends us back?" Clara stroked her sister's hair, forcing calm into her tone. "He won't. He could have left us back there if he wanted to." She hoped her words sounded certain, though doubt gnawed at her. The ranch appeared on the horizon hours later, lit only by a pale sliver of moon. A weather-beaten house stood with its porch sagging slightly, flanked by barns and corrals outlined against the starlight. Fences stretched into the dark, marking the boundaries of land Samuel had kept to himself for years. The wagon rolled to a halt before the house. Samuel climbed down, his boots crunching in the dirt, then reached up a hand to help them down. Clara hesitated, but June, too weary to resist, let herself be guided. Samuel carried their bundles inside, leaving the door wide for them to follow. The air smelled of wood smoke and leather within, heavy with the faint mustiness of a place kept clean but unlived in. The furnishings were simple: a table scarred from years of use, chairs with worn cushions, a hearth with ashes still warm from earlier. Against the far wall stood a piano, its keys cloaked in dust. Clara's eyes caught on it, surprised. It seemed out of place in the otherwise barren room. Samuel set their belongings down. "Upstairs," he said finally, his voice gravelly from disuse. He gestured toward the narrow staircase. "2 rooms. Pick one. There's water in the basin. We rise early." That was all. He turned and busied himself near the fire, leaving them standing in uneasy silence. Clara guided June upstairs. The floor creaked beneath their boots as they found a small bedroom, plain, with a narrow bed, a chest, and a single lamp. It was more than they'd had in weeks. June collapsed onto the mattress, burying her face in the quilt, sobs shaking her thin frame. Clara sat beside her, smoothing her sister's back. "It's all right now. We're safe here." But as she whispered the words, she wondered if they were true. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Samuel spoke little, rising before dawn and working until dusk. He showed them how to tend the chickens, how to fetch water from the pump, how to mend simple tasks around the house. Clara picked up quickly, her hands blistering at first but growing calloused with effort. She welcomed the work. It steadied her nerves and gave her a sense of belonging, however fragile. June, however, struggled. She was softer, unused to labor beyond the small chores of their old farm kitchen. Her fingers fumbled with the rough tools, her eyes often straying toward the piano in the corner. Clara caught her once, lifting the lid and pressing a single dusty key, the note ringing faint and hollow in the quiet house. Samuel had paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, only turned away, but Clara noticed the tension in his shoulders. That night, after supper of beans and bread, June asked timidly, "Mr. Hartley, may I play it? Just for a little while?" Samuel's hands stilled on the tin cup he was setting down. For a long moment the room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Then he gave a short nod. June's face lit with a fragile smile. She sat at the bench, brushing dust from the keys. Her fingers trembled as she began, uncertain, but soon the melody of an old hymn filled the room. Soft, tender notes wrapped around them like a balm. Clara watched Samuel out of the corner of her eye. He sat rigid at first, staring into the flames, but gradually his shoulders eased, his gaze softening with something distant, almost pained. When June finished, silence lingered heavy in the air. Samuel rose without a word and left the room. The door shut behind him, and Clara felt the echo of his grief hang there long after. Weeks passed. Winter crept closer, the nights sharper with frost. Clara found herself working beside Samuel more often, learning the rhythms of ranch life. He showed her how to patch fences, how to spot sickness in the cattle, how to ride the trails with a steady seat. His instruction was curt, but never cruel. He watched her with the same measuring eyes he had in town, as though testing her resolve. Clara met his gaze each time, refusing to waver. She had no choice but to prove herself, if not for her sake, then for June's. One morning, as the sun bled pale across the horizon, Samuel handed her a pair of work gloves. "Fence lines down by the creek. You'll come with me." Clara nodded, pulling them on despite the sting in her fingers. She followed him across the fields, the grass stiff with frost. They worked side by side, lifting heavy posts, hammering nails into stubborn wood. Her arms ached, sweat chilled her back despite the cold, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace. When at last the fence stood firm again, Samuel regarded her with something almost like approval. "You work harder than most men," he said simply. Clara straightened, chest heaving. "I don't have the luxury not to." Their eyes held for a moment, his gray, hers fierce blue, before he turned back toward the house. But the faintest nod lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. June, meanwhile, grew more confident in the house. She cooked meals, tended to the hearth, and, whenever she could, coaxed music from the piano. At first she played hesitantly, but soon her fingers danced, filling the rooms with warmth that had been missing for years. Clara noticed Samuel often paused in the doorway when June played, his expression softened by memory. Sometimes he lingered long enough to listen through a whole piece before retreating. It was during one such evening that June whispered to Clara in their room upstairs, "He isn't as cold as he seems. Did you see the way he listened? He misses someone. I can feel it." Clara sighed, pulling the quilt tighter around them. "Maybe so. But don't mistake kindness for weakness, June. We still don't know why he took us in." June touched her sister's hand. "Maybe he was lonely, just like us." Clara didn't answer, but the thought kept her awake long into the night. The first snow came in early December, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Clara rose at dawn to find Samuel already outside, his breath pluming in the cold air as he checked the horses. She joined him without being asked, hauling water from the pump and breaking ice from the troughs. Later, as they carried wood to the house, Samuel finally spoke more than a sentence at once. "Winter's hard here. Storms roll sudden. You'll need to be ready, both of you." Clara met his eyes. "We'll manage. We've survived worse." Something flickered in his gaze then. Recognition, respect. He gave a slow nod. That night, as the snow deepened and the wind howled, Clara sat by the fire with June while Samuel mended a bridle. The warmth of the room, the glow of lamplight, the faint strains of June's humming, it felt for the first time almost like home. Clara allowed herself to breathe, just a little. Yet in her heart she knew peace was fragile. Winter was only beginning, and storms, of weather, of men, of fate, had a way of testing even the strongest walls. And as Samuel watched the flames with eyes shadowed by old grief, Clara wondered if the silence that had shielded him so long would one day break, and what truths it might reveal when it did. The wind howled against the walls of the ranch house, a low, mournful sound that seeped through every crack and rattled every shutter. Snow had begun 2 days ago, light at first, then thick and relentless, until the land lay buried under a heavy quilt of white. The air outside was bitter, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Clara rose before dawn, her breath puffing in the cold bedroom. She pulled on her boots and coat, glancing at June still bundled beneath quilts. June stirred, half awake, her lips murmuring, "It's too cold, Clara." Clara touched her sister's forehead, smoothing back loose strands of hair. "Stay in bed. I'll help Mr. Hartley with the chores." She slipped downstairs, where Samuel was already by the door, pulling on his heavy coat. His hat shadowed his eyes, his jaw unshaven from long nights of work. He nodded once at her presence, no surprise in his gaze. He had grown accustomed to finding her ready at his side. "Cattle need water. Fences might have gone under. Best see it now before it gets worse." His voice was rough as gravel, but steady. "I'm coming," Clara said firmly, tugging on her gloves. They stepped into the storm together. Snow whipped around them, stinging Clara's cheeks. The world beyond the porch was a white blur, sky and ground, indistinguishable but for the dim outline of barns and fences. The drifts reached her knees, each step a struggle. Samuel trudged ahead, breaking the path with powerful strides. Clara followed, her legs burning with effort, but she kept pace. The cattle lowed from the barn, their breath steaming in the frozen air. Inside, the animals were restless, stamping hooves, eyes rolling with unease. "They'll freeze if we don't get water to 'em," Samuel muttered, moving to break ice at the trough with his axe. Clara grabbed a bucket, hauling water from the pump outside. The handle bit her fingers, the cold slicing through her gloves, but she gritted her teeth and worked. Again and again, she hauled water until her arms screamed with pain. Samuel's sharp gaze flicked to her, measuring, but he said nothing. When at last the cattle settled, drinking greedily, he gave a short grunt. Good. Clara leaned against the wall, chest heaving. Her hair clung damp to her forehead, her breath ragged. She caught Samuel's eyes in the dim light, and for a brief moment she thought she saw something there, respect, maybe even admiration. But he turned away too quickly to be sure. They checked the fences next. Snow had bent posts and pulled wire loose. The creek that cut through the property was swollen, ice clogging its edges. Samuel waded into the drift, lifting a sagging post with brute strength. Clara hurried to hold it steady while he hammered it back into place. The storm worsened, wind shrieking, snow blinding. Clara's face burned with cold, her hands numb despite the gloves. At last, Samuel barked, "Enough! Back to the house!" She stumbled after him, half frozen, her body aching. When they reached the door, warmth rushed over her like a blessing. She tore off her wet gloves, wincing as blood returned to her fingers. June hurried from the kitchen, worry etched into her features. "Clara, you're freezing. Your lips are blue." She pulled her sister toward the fire, wrapping a quilt around her shoulders. Samuel set his tools aside and sank heavily into a chair, exhaustion written in every line of him. For once, he did not bark orders or move on to the next task. He only sat there, silent, staring into the flames. Clara studied him through bleary eyes. His face, so often unreadable, looked worn, almost vulnerable in the flicker of light. She wondered what weight he carried, what loneliness had etched those deep lines into his brow. The storm did not pass quickly. For 3 days, snow lashed the ranch. The barn roof groaned beneath its weight. The windows rattled endlessly. They worked tirelessly. Samuel outside and the worst of it, Clara by his side whenever he allowed it, June tending to meals and firewood. On the 4th night, Clara found him collapsed in the barn, leaning against a stall post. His face was pale, his breath labored. She dropped the bucket she carried, rushing to him. "Mr. Hartley!" Her hands grasped his shoulders. "Samuel!" The name slipped from her lips before she thought. "You're burning up!" He tried to push her away, stubborn pride in his eyes, but his strength failed him. Clara and June half carried him back to the house, laying him on his bed. His skin was hot with fever, his body trembling. June fetched cool water and cloths, her eyes wide with fear. Clara sat beside him through the night, pressing damp cloths to his forehead, coaxing him to drink. His fever broke into sweats, his breath harsh. At one point his hand clutched hers with surprising strength, his voice rasping in delirium. "Anna!" Clara froze. The name was unfamiliar, yet heavy with longing. June, sitting nearby, whispered, "It must have been his wife." Clara held his hand tighter, whispering back, "Then we'll keep him here, for her sake too." Hours stretched into dawn. At last his fever eased, his breathing steadier. Clara slumped, exhaustion pulling at her bones. June gently draped a blanket over her sister as she dozed beside the bed, still clutching Samuel's hand. By the next day, Samuel stirred awake. His eyes opened slowly, meeting Clara's weary gaze. For the first time since they had known him, his expression softened into something unguarded. "You should have left me there," he murmured. Clara straightened, shaking her head fiercely. "We'd never leave you, not after what you've done for us." Silence lingered, heavy but not cold. Finally he said, "I thought I was done with family, done with people, but you stayed." June smiled faintly from the doorway. "Because you stayed for us first." Samuel's eyes shifted between them, something shifting deep within. He gave a slow nod, as though conceding to a truth he had long resisted. The days that followed were gentler, though the storm still raged outside. Samuel regained his strength slowly, but Clara noticed he no longer carried himself with quite the same distance. He accepted June's meals without gruff dismissal, listened to her music without retreating, and when Clara worked beside him, he let his gaze linger longer, not just measuring, but seeing her. One evening, as June played a lively tune on the piano, Clara found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time since their parents died. Samuel glanced at her, and though his lips did not smile, his eyes carried a warmth she had never seen before. It startled her, that warmth. It frightened her too, but it also kindled something deep in her chest, a fragile spark she dared not name. The storm broke at last. The sun returned, dazzling against the snow. The ranch lay battered but standing, the fences mended, the cattle alive. Clara, June, and Samuel stood together on the porch, breathing the crisp air. For the first time, Clara did not feel like a guest or a burden. She felt like someone who belonged. And Samuel, silent as ever, seemed to sense it too. His gaze rested on the sisters beside him, not with suspicion or obligation, but with a quiet acceptance. The winter had tested them all, but in that trial, something unspoken had been forged, something stronger than fear, stronger than loneliness. Something that might, in time, grow into love. The thaw came slowly, reluctant as a wounded animal. Snow shrank from the fields in patches, leaving behind black mud and waterlogged earth. Fences leaned. Roofs sagged under the last weight of ice, and the cattle, leaner now, wandered with hungry eyes across the pale grass. The storm had broken the land as much as it had broken spirits, and for weeks the town limped in recovery. Samuel's ranch had survived, scarred but standing. Clara rode out with him each morning, her boots sinking deep in the thawing ground, her gloves stiff with wear. She mended rails, lifted branches from the creek, and learned to carry herself in the saddle as though she had been born to it. Samuel no longer gave her measured glances of doubt. He no longer needed to. She proved herself each day, and he had begun to ride in silence that was no longer guarded, but companionable. June, too, had bloomed in the house. Music no longer trembled uncertain from her fingers. It rang strong, filling the rooms with warmth each evening as the piano grew bright beneath her hands. Samuel had even sat in the chair nearest the instrument one night, staring not at the fire but at her as she played. When she finished, his eyes had glistened faintly, though no words passed his lips. But peace was a fragile thing, and peace in Dry Creek was a rarer thing still. It began with whispers in town. Clara had gone to fetch supplies with Samuel, and as she passed the mercantile window she heard them, voices low but sharp, men muttering about the Hartley place. Two girls, Liven, out there with him. Folks are talkin', don't seem right. Not proper anyhow, men his age taken, in strays. You know what they say. Clara had stiffened, her blood rising. She would have turned on them if Samuel's hand hadn't touched her arm, steady but firm. "Keep walkin'," he muttered. And she had, her jaw clenched, her heart pounding with shame she did not deserve. The rumors swelled, like storm clouds gathering. By the time spring fully broke, Clara could feel the weight of eyes on her whenever she and June ventured into town. Some looked with pity, others with judgment, others with hunger. She hated every gaze, hated the way men whispered in corners. It came to a head on a bright afternoon, the air still cool but heavy with the promise of warmth. Samuel had ridden into town with the sisters for supplies. The wagon was nearly loaded when a voice cut through the noise of the street. "Well, now, if it ain't the Whitfield girls." Clara froze. Dobbs, the same greasy mustached man who had cornered them months ago. He sauntered from the saloon, a grin splitting his face. A group of ranch hands followed, some already red-cheeked from drink. "You're lookin' comfortable these days," Dobbs said loudly, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Ain't it somethin'? Old man Hartley here taken in not one but two girls. Mighty charitable. Or maybe mighty greedy." Laughter rippled through the street. June shrank behind Clara, her face pale. Clara stepped forward, fury igniting her veins. "You shut your mouth, Dobbs." He smirked, circling. "Oh, don't get your feathers ruffled. I just reckon the town ought to know what sort of house he's runnin'. Two strays under his roof? Folks'll start thinkin' things." "Enough." Samuel's voice cracked the air like a whip. He stepped between them, his eyes like steel. "You'll keep your tongue behind your teeth, Dobbs." But Dobbs only chuckled, emboldened by the crowd gathering. Or what? You too old to fight, Hartley. You think folks respect your silence, but truth is they laugh behind your back. You ain't no saint saving these girls. You're just a lonely old fool keeping 'em for yourself." The laughter grew. Clara's fists clenched, her chest heaving. She felt June trembling at her back, and something inside her snapped. She pushed past Samuel, her voice ringing clear. "You will not speak of him that way." Her words silenced some, startled others. Her eyes blazed as she faced the men. "Mr. Hartley gave us shelter when no one else would. He fed us when we were starving, kept us safe when you," she pointed at Dobbs, her voice sharp with scorn, "would have sold us like cattle. You think we're ashamed? No. We are proud to call his home ours. And if you think you can take us from him, you'll have to go through me first." The street went quiet. Her breath came in hard gasps, but she held her ground, chin high, eyes unyielding. Dobbs sneered, stepping closer. Big words from a girl who begged him to take her sister instead. "Don't think folks don't know." Clara's face burned, but she did not waver. "Yes," I begged, "because I'd rather give myself than see June suffer. That's what family does. That's what he gave us. A chance to live, not just survive. Something you'd never understand." The crowd stirred, uneasy now, whispers shifting from amusement to doubt. Samuel stepped forward then. For the first time since Clara had known him, his voice rang not as gravel, not as mutter, but as thunder. "They are mine." His words carried like iron. He looked over the crowd, his tall frame unshaken. "Not as property, not as possession, as family. You'll not take them. You'll not shame them. They chose to stay, and I chose to keep 'em, and I'll bury the man who tries to tear that from me." Silence fell. Even Dobbs faltered, his grin slipping under the weight of Samuel's gaze. The townsfolk shifted, some nodding, others looking away in shame. Clara's heart thundered. She glanced at Samuel, and in his eyes she saw no shadow, no retreat. She saw a man who had finally broken his silence and done it for them. Dobbs muttered something under his breath, backing away. His men followed, the crowd dispersing slowly. The sisters stood trembling in the wake of the storm. Samuel turned to them. His face softened, his voice low enough for only them to hear. "You don't owe this town your shame. You owe 'em nothing. You've got a home now. That's enough." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to say more, but words tangled in her chest. June clung to her, tears glistening, relief flooding her small frame. The three climbed into the wagon. As they rolled out of town, Clara glanced back once at the street where whispers had nearly destroyed them. But it was behind her now, shrinking with each turn of the wheels. Ahead lay the open road, the wide fields, the battered but standing ranch, and for the first time she felt not fear, not doubt, but certainty. They belonged, and nothing, not Dobbs, not the town, not the ghosts of the past, could take that away. The wagon wheels creaked along the dirt road as the town of Dry Creek dwindled into the distance, swallowed by dust and silence. Clara sat with June beside her, her hands still trembling from the confrontation, her heart still beating to the rhythm of Samuel's thunderous words. The image of him standing tall in the street, voice cutting through the whispers like a blade, burned into her mind. He had spoken for them, not out of obligation, but with something deeper, something unshakable. June pressed against her shoulder, whispering, "He defended us. He called us family." Clara drew her sister close, her throat tight. "Yes," she murmured, staring at Samuel's steady back as he guided the reins. "He did." The rest of the ride passed in silence, not heavy, but filled with a quiet that seemed different from before. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of meaning, of things unsaid but understood. When the ranch came into view, its weathered fences and fields gleaming beneath the setting sun, Clara felt a rush of something she hadn't dared believe in for months: belonging. They unloaded supplies in the dim light, the smell of earth rich after rain. Samuel carried the heaviest sacks without complaint. his shoulders broad beneath his worn shirt. Clara followed with smaller bundles, June with lighter parcels. When the last of the goods was stacked in the pantry, Samuel paused by the door, removing his hat. He looked at them both, his eyes softer than the steel they had seen in town. "You did well today," he said simply. His gaze lingered on Clara, then June. "Both of you." Clara swallowed hard, the warmth of his words sinking deep. June's face brightened, the fear she had carried replaced by relief. That night, supper was quiet, but warm. June hummed softly as she stirred the stew, and Samuel listened without the usual wall around him. Clara sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, stealing glances at him as the firelight traced the lines of his face. She had thought of him as a savior, then as a master of silence, then as a man burdened by grief. But tonight, she saw something else, someone who had chosen them, just as they had chosen him. When June began to play the piano after supper, the notes rang clear and steady. Samuel leaned back in his chair, eyes closed, as if the music lifted years from his shoulders. Clara watched him, her heart stirring with emotions she scarcely dared to name. The days that followed carried a new rhythm. The work was still grueling, fences to mend, cattle to tend, the endless tasks of spring, but the air seemed lighter. The tension that had once filled the house gave way to laughter, quiet at first, then freer. One morning, Clara found Samuel waiting by the corral with 2 saddled horses. "You'll ride the north pasture with me today," he said. "Fences need checkin'. You'll manage one side, I'll take the other." Clara nodded, mounting her horse with steady grace. As they rode side by side, she felt the vastness of the land stretch around them, rolling hills, grass just beginning to green, the creek glinting in sunlight. For the first time, she felt not like a burden, but like a partner. At midday, they stopped by the creek to rest the horses. Samuel sat on a flat rock, pulling a biscuit from his saddlebag. He handed one to Clara without a word. She accepted it, their fingers brushing briefly. The touch sent a shiver through her, though she masked it with a bite of bread. After a long silence, he spoke. "When I lost my wife, I thought I'd live the rest of my days alone. The house was too quiet, the work too heavy. I buried myself in it, shut out everything else." His voice was low, almost lost to the murmur of the water. Clara's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He looked at her then, his gray eyes clear. "And then you and June came. I didn't plan it. Didn't know why I took you at first. Maybe I couldn't stand to see you thrown to wolves. Maybe I saw something in you both that reminded me life wasn't done with me yet." Clara's breath caught. She held his gaze, the world narrowing to the space between them. Her heart pounded, her cheeks flushed. Before she could speak, he turned back to the creek, breaking the moment. "Eat. We've still got work." But the words lingered, echoing in her chest long after. June noticed the change too. That evening, as they sat upstairs, June whispered, "Clara, he looks at you differently now." Clara flushed. "Don't be foolish." "I'm not," June insisted, a smile tugging her lips. "When you're with him, it's like the weight he carries isn't as heavy. And when you speak, he listens. He doesn't listen to anyone else that way." Clara pressed a hand to her chest, her pulse racing. She didn't answer, but June's words stirred feelings she had been trying to quiet. Weeks passed, and the ranch bloomed under their care. Fields grew green, calves bounded in the pasture, the creek ran clear with melted snow. The 3 of them worked together as though they had always belonged to one another. One evening, a golden sunset washed the land in light. Samuel stood on the porch, watching Clara and June laugh as they hung laundry on the line, the fabric glowing in the sun's last rays. His heart stirred in a way it hadn't for years. Later, when the sisters came inside, Clara lingered by the fire as June climbed upstairs. Samuel sat in his chair, the crackle of flames filling the quiet. Clara hesitated, then stepped closer. "Mr. Hartley," she began, her voice unsteady. "Samuel." He looked up at her, surprise flickering across his features at the sound of his name on her lips. She swallowed hard, gathering courage. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. You gave us a home when we had none. You gave us safety when the world wanted to break us. "And she faltered, her heart pounding, "I am grateful, more than I can say." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he rose slowly, his height casting a shadow over her. His hand lifted, calloused fingers brushing her cheek with a gentleness that stunned her. "You don't owe me gratitude," he said softly. "You've given me more than I gave you. You've given me back my life." Clara's breath caught, her eyes stinging with sudden tears. The world seemed to still, the fire's glow the only light. Samuel's hand lingered, then fell. He stepped back, his silence heavy but no longer cold. Clara stood trembling, her heart ablaze, knowing something unspoken had passed between them, something stronger than fear, stronger than doubt. Summer came, bright and alive. The ranch thrived, the house filled with music and laughter. The townsfolk, once whispering, grew quieter, some even nodding in respect when Samuel rode through with the sisters. Dobbs and his ilk kept their distance, their power broken. On a warm evening, the three of them sat on the porch, the stars blazing above. June hummed a tune, her head resting against Clara's shoulder. Samuel sat beside them, his presence steady, his silence comfortable. Clara looked out at the land, the fields, the barn, the endless horizon. For the first time since their parents' death, she felt peace. Not fragile, not fleeting, but real. She turned her gaze to Samuel, and when his eyes met hers, no words were needed. The truth was there between them. They were not alone. They were not lost. They were a family. And love, unexpected and unlooked for, had found them after all. And so, in the quiet heart of the prairie, Samuel, Clara, and June discovered that true love is not found in possession or in sacrifice alone, but in choosing one another when the world would tear them apart. From loneliness and loss, they built a home where laughter replaced silence, where music returned to the halls, and where love grew steady and unshakable, like the land itself beneath their feet. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles so you won't miss the next tale of passion, sacrifice, and romance from the rugged frontier. More stories await, each one filled with the spirit of the West and the promise of love against all odds.